Hi there. Welcome to today's session. I'm Jonathan Westerling, Manager of Special Programs for Google's SAS team. I'm coming to you today from the Eng EDU studio, where Google records videos to advance the technical abilities of everyone at Google and beyond. Today we're here to debunk several myths about SAS and CBRS. These are misconceptions that we've heard many times over the past few months, and we're here today to set the record straight. I'll be joined by Casper Faust, who is a Google SAS interference support agent. Casper hails from Atlanta, Georgia, and spent 5 years as field operations manager, climbing towers and installing 3.5 gigahertz equipment. He also brings 8 years of experience with the Department of Defense doing IP and RF networking. Now, before we bring in Casper, a couple of notes about the video and how this works. If you haven't joined us before, you can always rewind the video if there's something you want to hear again. So if we went too fast through something or you need something repeated, just rewind a little bit using the slider at the bottom of the screen, and you can recap. We don't have to. You don't have to ask for us to repeat certain things. You just go back right, do it in real time. And also, this video is going to be available on demand afterwards. So if you weren't able to join us live, you can always check it out on our Google SAS YouTube channel. Anytime after the broadcast is finished, we'll be posting it there. We will be doing a Q&A afterwards, so if you'd like, you can ask questions via the chat on YouTube. If you've never used chat on YouTube before to ask questions or to post a question, the first time you do it, it's going to ask you for your identity. It's just asking for something that we'll use to identify. It'll show you that on the screen as you post your question. So once you put that in, you'll be able to go ahead and type in your questions for our Q&A, which will follow our presentation where we're going to present 9 myths about SAS and CBRS. We're going to crush those myths, and to do that, we're going to bring in Casper Faust now. Casper, thank you so much for joining us today on Google SAS Webinars from Atlanta.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jonathan. Glad to be here.
And you've actually heard these myths in the course of doing your work for Google, right? You've actually heard every single one of these maybe multiple times.
That's correct. I've heard every myth that we're going to talk about today directly from a SAS customer, as far as something that they were under the understanding or impression that it was true, and that's how SAS or CBRS worked. And we've had to set the record straight. The 9 myths that we've chosen don't represent all the myths that we've heard, but they're definitely the most common or the most prominent myths that we wanted to dispel. So that's what we're here to do today.
Awesome. So we've got 9 myths in total that we're going to go through. These are sort of the most prevalent ones that we found. We'll walk you through those, and then, like I said, we'll do a Q&A afterwards. If you have questions about any of these myths, pop them in the chat, and then we'll go through those afterwards. But for right now, Casper, it's all yours, and let's go through those myths. We'll crush them.
All right. Google SAS MythCrushers, round 1. The SAS assigns channels to CBSDs. This is an extremely common myth, and it's understandable from an operator standpoint that it would be perceived this way. So if a CBSD is set to either do a spectrum inquiry or have an automatic channel selection feature, from the operator standpoint, you provision the CBSD for your network, you bring it online, you connect it to the SAS, and then it has a channel grant, and it's operating in a certain frequency. The operator didn't tell it what frequency to operate in, and it got a grant. So it seems like that grant was assigned by the SAS, but that is not the case. The SAS never tells any device, this is the frequency you will use. It simply responds yes or no to a requested frequency from the CBSD itself. So while it may have the image or the appearance that a CBSD was assigned a channel by the SAS, in reality, the CBSD asked for that channel from the SAS, and the SAS told it, yes, you can use that. So the myth is that the SAS assigns channels to CBSDs. Reality, the SAS can only provide responses to what a CBSD requests. The SAS will never tell you you have to use this frequency. All right, myth 2. The SAS proactively decides CBSD channels and enforces the changes. Now, this seems a lot like myth 1, but there is a definite distinction here. So what if in an event that an operator did assign specific channels to a CBSD, and then that CBSD, let's say it has a DPA activation event or any other number of reasons that a CBSD might lose its grants. In that situation, the operator specifically said, let's use channels 5, 6, and 7. And then later on, the operator finds that CBSD has a channel grant for channel 1 only. And once again, it has the impression, wait a minute, I said to use a 30 megahertz channel width on these upper channels. Why do you now have a 10 megahertz grant on a lower channel? That's not what I wanted. SAS, why did you give that to my CBSD? The reality is that if a CBSD loses its grants for any reason, it will then do a new grant request. So while an operator may have specified the exact frequency and parameter that it wanted the CBSD to use originally, if it loses those grants, either all of it or part of them, and it has to request new ones, the CBSD might not request the same grants that you originally wanted it to operate on. So the SAS is not saying, hey, you have to use a 10 megahertz channel width now. It's simply responding, once again, yes or no, to whatever the CBSD asked for. So the SAS, it might tell you have to vacate some certain spectrum, but it's not going to tell you where you have to go after that. All right, myth 3. And this is a very common myth that I'm starting to hear more and more every day. Myth 3 is the spectrum availability graph and overlay is a heat map of CBRS deployments in the US. For anyone that's familiar with the Google SAS portal, on the left side, you can click on the overlays and see the category B spectrum availability overlay. And it gives you a little, we just took a snip of it here, but it will apply colors to a geographical area. And that is very commonly interpreted as a heat map. People are under the impression that this is showing where live CBRS networks are operating, and that you can see the propagation of the radio waves based on looking at this map. That is not the case, actually. So what this map is showing is where you can receive grants at. An area that's completely green like this has all 15 channels available. Once you get into the more yellow colored areas, you have less channels available. This has nothing to do with channel quality. It's simply the grant availability, whether the SAS will say yes or no to certain channels in that area. You get into a blue area like this, where it's either pending or unavailable, then you'll have no grants. Now, this gets confusing for a lot of people, because if you think that this is a heat map, then it looks like the blue area is where all the CBRS is. Now, in actuality, because those grants are unavailable, that's the area that no CBRS is. Conversely, up here in the green section, in the northern part of the map, if you think that this is a heat map showing where CBRS deployments currently are, then you would say, up here near Snow Hill, that's a totally clean area. Nobody's deployed there. In reality, that's just saying that there's 15 channels available, and you won't be denied a channel request in that area. So it's very likely that more CBRS operations are up here in the green part than they would be anywhere else. So the reality is most areas with low availability are due to incumbent presence or a whisper zone. And so it's not a heat map of where the RF is, it's just a map showing you where grant availability is. All right, myth 4. If no PALs are showing in the spectrum availability map, then no PALs were sold. This goes back into the idea of that overlay that we were looking at. If you see an area that's completely green and you think, hey, all the channels are available in the place that I'm trying to operate, then that can lead a lot of people to the idea that no one bought a PAL in my county, so all 15 channels are completely available to me. The reality becomes that PAL channels that have been sold only become unavailable if the PAL owner is actively heartbeating with a CBSD in that county. So if I owned 4 PALs in generic county A, and I'm not using them, I don't have any registered devices heartbeating on those PAL grants, then anyone can use those PAL frequencies. They only become unavailable for the GAA spectrum if I deploy and heartbeat CBSDs on my PAL channels. So if you look at an overlay and you see full availability, well, then you can certainly use any channel there. But you definitely need to check with the FCC's PAL registry to see if any PALs are sold in your county, because while they might be available now, down the road, somebody might decide, okay, I'm going to start using my PALs, and then those channels become unavailable to the presence of a newly drawn PPA. So yeah, the myth is that if I don't see PALs, then nobody sold them. The reality, PALs only show up on the spectrum availability map once they're in use. So definitely a strong distinction between those two. All right, myth 5. GAA channels are reserved by the CBSD using it. Now, this is one of the most important and most damaging misconceptions that I have seen since I've been working with the Google SAS team. So the idea is that there is a GAA grant reservation policy. Now, this is a myth. It doesn't exist. But what people commonly believe is that, let's say I, Casper, am operating this tower on the left over here. And on my northeast facing sector right here, what if I have a GAA grant request of channel 5? And then months later, a new operator comes into town and he's going to operate this tower on the right. The myth that most people believe is that if I have a GAA grant request on channel 5 right here, that this other GAA operator will be denied a grant request on channel 5 because I'm already occupying that area and the SAS would be preventing that interference. That is the myth. The reality is that GAA channels are not reservable and are shared. So the policy of GAA is that it is general access. The SAS does everything it can to dissuade and disrecommend overlapping channel grants. We try to advertise that through the use of the COEX tab. We try to advertise that through the spectrum inquiries that CBSDs perform to try to ensure that they make a more suitable and proper grant selection for themselves. However, if an operator or a CBSD decides that they wanted to use a channel that is already heavily in use in a given area, and there's no reason to deny that grant based on either incumbent use or PAL use, then the SAS is required by law to give that grant to the device asking for it. Grants are only denied based on the protection of the incumbent or an active PAL holder's PPA. So, the short and sweet plain English answer is, if I've got a tower and I want to use channel 1, 2, and 3, and another person wants to put their CBSDs right next to mine and use channel 1, 2, and 3, the SAS is going to allow it. It'll try everything it can to dissuade it, but it cannot legally deny those grant requests. All right, myth 6. The SAS is mandated to solve interference problems for GAA users. So this definitely goes hand in hand with myth 5, but getting the idea of the order of priority and precedence down it goes a long way to understanding the operation of the SAS and what the mandates are. So the primary goal of the SAS, of any SAS, is to protect Tier 1. Tier 1 is the incumbent. This is the DoD, as they were the original holders of the spectrum, and the agreement was that the spectrum can be used by citizen operations so long as there was a method or a system in place to guarantee full channel quality or use of access to the original holder of the spectrum, which was the DoD. So that's our incumbent. That's the primary job of the SAS. Tier 2 now falls into the CBRS section. So Tier 2 and 3 are both part of CBRS, and Tier 2 is the priority access license. These are PALs. So that's where CBRS protection comes in from the SAS. If you have a PAL, you're heart beating on it, and you have an active PPA, then the SAS will deny grant requests for any CBSD that is not the PAL holder that is near those PAL grants. Tier 3 is GAA, General Authorized Access. GAA is, the simple way to look at it is, it's more along the lines of the old school 5 gigahertz connections that we had out there. You can use the spectrum, you can get a grant on it, you can use it however you will, but there's no guarantee of spectrum quality. Now, the difference is that with the SAS, you do get reports on spectrum quality. With any of the old previous publicly available frequencies, the only report on spectrum quality you had was your spectrum analyzer. You had no way to look into an area prior to your deployment or get an idea of what was going on outside of just your own gear being deployed on a tower. SAS does provide insight into what's going on, but based on the law, there's no protection that is directly given to GAA. So if there is interference from one GAA operator onto another, there's nothing that the SAS can do directly to stop it. The SAS can try to put two operators in contact with each other. It can try to negotiate channel assignments if both parties agree to it, but a SAS cannot directly take a grant away from a GAA operator based on the interference of operator 1 to operator 2 or vice versa. So the reality, the SAS is only required to protect higher tier users, being the incumbent and PALs. All right, myth 7. The SAS will prevent my devices from interfering with each other. I find this one a whole lot with a lot of indoor uses, but it's very common with densely populated outdoor use. So the idea being that if you put 4 CBSDs on a tower and they are set to do their own channel selection or they request a spectrum inquiry for the SAS, the idea is that the SAS is, and this goes hand in hand with myth 1, where the SAS is assigning frequencies, which it is not, as we've discussed. The idea being that the SAS would never give you a grant on any 2 of these cells that would cause a problem, that the SAS will do your spectrum deconfliction for those CBSDs. That is the myth. So the reality is that the SAS gives grants based on what's requested and whether they interfere with higher tier users. So we can't deconflict interference from, or we can't stop an operator from causing self-interference any more than we can stop 2 operators from interfering with each other. Again, the SAS only says yes or no to a CBSD's request. It will never tell you, oh, you need to have this grant, and it's never going to say, oh, I see that you requested channel 3 and 4 on your alpha sector going north, so therefore I should deny you channel 3 and 4 on your beta sector going east, because these 2 overlap. The SAS isn't going to look at it that way. It's going to assume your CBSDs are either listening to their spectrum inquiries or that they have a predefined operation from their owner or their operator that will tell them what to do. So we're never going to deconflict these channel requests, because that would be denying you a grant. And that's what we don't want to do. We're not in the business of denying a grant. All right, myth 8. Each SAS independently manages its own CBRS operators. So this is a bit of a mixed myth. It's mixed in the sense that while all customers of Google SAS directly interact and manage their own equipment through the Google SAS, it's not the Google SAS alone that will define the grant authorizations or the EIRP power levels for those devices. This is determined during CPAS. So CPAS is the coordinated periodic activity among SASs. This is when all SAS vendors across America, they have their systems sync with each other and determine what grants have been given out that day, what changes have been made to any existing grants, and how that will impact the incumbent and PAL holders across America. So it's kind of everyone sits down at a table and shows their card and says, this is what's going on as of today's activities. How should we recalculate everything? The impact of this is many operators see the difference from their day 1 to day 2 grants, where you might bring a CBSD online and it gets reduced power on the first day, but then the second day it's got a full power grant. Well, when was it determined that that device was able to go from partial power to full power? That happens during CPAS. So CPAS is when all the SASs agree on how to enforce the rule of CBRS. And while each operator is independently, managed would be the wrong word. Each operator interacts with their own SAS independently, but the management of all the products that a SAS return is agreed to by all SASs across America. All right, and myth 9, a CBSD will function with multiple SAS at the same time. Once again, another partial myth. So you can have a single CBSD registered with as many SASs as you want. However, it can only receive a grant and heartbeat on a grant from one SAS. So you could register a CBSD with CommScope and Federated and Google all at the same time, but it can only heartbeat and receive a grant from one of those SASs. And it cannot receive a grant from another SAS until the grant from the original SAS has been released. So that's the difference. You can be partially interacted with multiple SASs, but it can't be actively using multiple SASs at once. So the reality, a CBSD technically can be registered with multiple SASs. However, it cannot receive grants from more than one. And pardon me, a CBSD requesting an additional grant from any SAS may lose both grants after CPAS. All right, well, those are the 9 most common myths that we hear. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A section. Maybe there'll be some new myths I haven't heard yet, and we can take a crack at answering those as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Casper, for taking us through those myths. That was super helpful. And it's awesome to really put these all together in one place and go through some of these common misconceptions that you've been hearing in the ecosystem. Now, one thing that I think is important to note, because we're going through a lot of these myths that you've heard, and we talked about the ways that, on the one hand, the SAS isn't going to assign a channel for you necessarily. And so you are in control of your network, and you can choose the channels that you want for GAA, and certainly if you're PAL, you want to use your PAL channels. But I think it's worth reminding people that Google SAS does offer many ways that you can, many tools to use to eliminate interference and to help choosing those channels. So while you're in control, the SAS actually has a lot of helpful information for you as well. And the ones that come to my mind are the ranked, the spectrum inquiry ranking that gets sent to the devices when they, if they request it, and of course in the SAS portal, channel quality.
Absolutely right, Jonathan. The SAS is going to do everything it can to avoid any interference between channels, but I guess the main thing I was trying to touch on was that if an operator or a device insists that regardless of whatever the channel quality or the spectrum inquiry may say about a channel, if they want channel 3, even if the SAS says, oh my gosh, no, it's the noisiest channel out there, you really don't want it. If they insist that they want it, then they're going to get a grant for it for GAA.
Absolutely.
But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of different ways that you can get an idea of what the spectral quality will be for any point in America by using the Google SAS dashboard.
Cool. So yeah, there's a lot of tools. We don't want to give people the wrong impression. There are a lot of tools that we can, and you did mention this in the presentation, but there's a lot of things that are better in the SAS world because it's a managed spectrum, and the SAS can really help guide you to those proper channels. Now, you and I are talking back and forth, but we actually would love to have some questions from our viewers who are joining us live. So we do these the last Thursday of the month generally, and we announce them in our Google SAS newsletter. But if you're watching this live and you've got a question about SAS and CBRS, no matter what it is, the reason we do those live, the reason we do these presentations live is so that we can take questions live, and we bring folks like you, Casper, along to answer these on demand. Sometimes we don't get any questions because we've done a good job explaining the topic, and like last time we got some questions from a new customer who'd come on board and had some questions about Google SAS as well. So pop those into the chat on YouTube if you have those, and we'll try to answer those live. Remember, there's about a 2-minute delay between when the things are posted in the chat and by the time the video goes out to YouTube and out to you. So it's not a real-time chat, but we will take those questions. So if you have one, pop it into the chat. I'm going to see it here on my tablet, and we'll ask that live. Casper, one of the things that had come up before, and that is sort of maybe a potentially increasing use case, is a lot of people deploying CBRS in building for like a corporate campus or maybe a university. And in that case, they probably GAA, and they're going to be assigning nodes fairly close together because those would be Cat A nodes, so lower power nodes. And I think it's worth reminding people that they're actually going to need to do some channel planning and use some of those tools we were just talking about in the SAS to make sure that they choose the channels appropriately, because unlike something like Wi-Fi or some other technologies, it really can help your performance a lot of your network if you choose those channels properly.
Oh, absolutely. One of the wonderful things about CBRS is that it propagates more like 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, but it's got the speed much more akin to 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. But then it can modulate so far, so your range is drastically extended compared to traditional Wi-Fi networks. The downside of that is because devices can connect at a longer range, then they can also hear interference from more devices that they might have been originally immune to. So doing proper channel planning will have a huge impact on both the performance as well as the stability of your network in the long run. And as we touched on, the SAS is just going to give you grants. Now, if your devices are set to perform a spectrum inquiry and you have the threshold tolerances, within your individual CBSD set to what you want it to do, whatever your SOPs are, then the device might pull or receive the grants that it requested appropriately. So if you have all of your tolerances set to where you can trust your CBSDs to request grants that you would want them to have, then they very well might pull the grants you want. But you should always look into your CBSDs and check to make sure that they got grants that don't conflict with each other. So if I've got a category A indoor deployment in a big office building, I've got 3 CBSDs that are all on floor 11 of this building. If all 3 of those on the same floor got overlapping grants, 2, 3, and 4 on all 3 of them, well, that's going to be a problem. And so that's something you definitely need to go in and look into, because once again, the SAS is just responding, hey, you asked for a grant on 2, 3, and 4. You can absolutely have it. It's not going to cause a problem to the incumbent or a PAL holder. So yeah, you definitely need to do some spectrum deconfliction and just checking to make sure that your CBSDs requested the grant that you wanted them to have.
Sure, and even though those are indoor, it might be an indoor installation, it's worth also checking the channel quality in the SAS portal, because there may be other operators nearby who would impact those channels as well.
Oh, 100%. It's always a good idea to check and actively monitor the channel quality reports in the SAS. It's definitely a good way to stay ahead of the curve. If a new operator comes on scene and deploys a large macro site, on a tower right next door to your indoor deployment, well, even with the shielding that you get from being an indoor deployment, you're still going to receive a lot of the ambient noise floor from that tower. And by looking at the coax tab, you have a good way to see, okay, well, I had wonderful quality on channel 7, 8, and 9, and now that's gone down to 20%. But I also see that some other channels have 100% quality. So I want to move over to those before any of my customers or employees that are using my CBRS network have a chance to feel the negative impacts from a newly deployed tower site that's using the same channels I was trying to use.
Cool. So I'll give a 2-minute warning here for questions in the Q&A. If anybody has a question that you've been thinking about asking, go ahead, post it in the chat, and we'll tackle it live here on today's Google SAS webinar. Want to mention a couple of other support options that we have for our customers here at Google. We have a 24/7 support team who responds by email at sas-support@google.com. And we've also got, we're just showing the slide there, our Google SAS YouTube channel, which has lots of content about SAS and CBRS, as well as presentations regarding our features. We do post these live monthly webinars to that channel, and you can subscribe to that to be notified when we publish new videos as well. So a reminder to certainly do that if you're interested in more and more of this content in a webinar style learning. So super helpful stuff to do. Casper, you did a great job, because everybody, we didn't have any questions about the myths you presented. I thought you did a great job putting those out there, showing us the reality, and setting this straight. We hope we'll get lots of views on this over the coming months as people get more and more excited and do more deployments into SAS CBRS. So Casper, thank you so much for putting this together, for joining us today, and for presenting SAS MythCrushers for us.
You're welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Before we go, I want to sincerely thank Mark Chow and Dana Doe for helping out with today's broadcast here at the Eng EDU studios, where Google records videos to advance the technical abilities of everyone at Google and beyond. Thanks again for hosting us today. Please join us next month for a fresh webinar about Google SAS technology and features. Take care, everyone. And don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you like this video. Click that thumbs up button. We really appreciate it. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next month for the next of these Google SAS webinars. Take care. Stay safe, everybody.